Happy Friday and welcome back to Brain Scratch. I'm John Lordan, and today we have a special follow-up segment for you about a case that we originally covered a year ago. However, the murder happened 26 years ago this week. And this family has active members still doing all they can to find truth and justice. It was January 16th, 1998, when 36-year-old Sherry Culp, a mother of two who was also 8.5 months pregnant, was leaving work in Springfield, Virginia. She got into her car and didn't even have a chance to put the keys in the ignition before shots rang out. 2 shots hit her head. The perpetrator ran off. Nothing had been stolen or taken from the vehicle, raising a serious question about the motive. Who would kill a pregnant woman in cold blood? The baby was successfully delivered via a C-section, but little Kelsey Morgan couldn't hold on and passed away 2 days later. She was buried in her mother's arms. I literally get chills just saying that. It's heartbreakingly beautiful. It's a weird feeling. When we originally covered this case, we learned that Sherry was in the middle of a custody battle with her ex-husband, Ann Culp, and little Kelsey was actually fathered by another man. The crime scene doesn't give us... Oh, here's a picture of Kelsey. This is Ann Culp. Now, the crime scene really doesn't give us much in the way of physical evidence. Imagine this situation. Someone walks up to the side of the car, they shoot through the window. There's no direct contact between the perpetrator and the victim. Thankfully, because this was a work day, there was other people in this kind of industrial park. There are some witnesses. There's some information that comes in from the witnesses. And there is one piece of physical evidence that's left behind, and that is some shell casings from those shots that were fired. Now, after I released that episode I did last year, I was very soon contacted by Sherry's stepfather, Ken Young. And he told me about how this family has never given up on this case. He brought me into the fold a bit, making some clarifications. If you guys remember, I was trying to piece this back together from pieces of news articles copied into forums, newspapers.com searches. It was really tough just to get the level of view that we were able to get. Thankfully, Ken kind of moved that forward for me significantly. And despite all of Ken's work over the years, someone else in the family is now kind of taking that torch and pushing forward to find the truth. And that's where we wind up today as we introduce Michael Mess to the show. Hey, Michael.
Hey, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Good. Thank you for being here. We've been talking for a few months in email at this point. We've got a lot to try to share with you guys. We have clarifications that we're going to make along the way from the last episode. But let's get it started with Michael. How are you connected to Sherry?
I am her nephew. So my mother is Sherry's sister.
Okay. And is your mother Sarah or is it the other sister? Because I only heard one mentioned.
My mother is Carol.
Carol. Okay.
And then they have another sister, Kelly.
Okay. Yeah. I did see Kelly mentioned in one of the news things, which, by the way, Michael has posted several of the kind of news segments from the years and the following years that are also disappearing from the internet. Really good job on doing that, Michael. I watched every single one of them earlier today. You know, they're the typical newscast type of format, 2 to 3 minutes or so. There's about 10 of them. I'll have links to all of those in the description box down below so you guys can check those out. And those were really helpful in terms of firming up some information and kind of piecing things together. Michael, when did you take on working on this case?
You know, it's really over the last, I'd say 3 to 5 years. I've always been very intrigued with it. When everything took place, I was 15 years old. And so I was, getting to that age where I was, alert and understanding, and always, the family, it was always a conversation, topic of discussion. I mean, every get together. And so when it went cold, and it hit that 20-year mark, it just seemed like such a big number. We've always had the thought that this thing would get solved at some point. And, 20 years into it, it's like it really just got my attention. And then last year for the 25th, it really just opened up my eyes a little bit. And I was like, you know what? I had reached out to some of the cold case detectives, and I had reached out to a couple of networks and shows that wanted to take on this story, and they had fired back that this is still considered an active case, and so it kind of gave me some hope, some inspiration, and from there it's just been something that's been on the forefront of my mind,
Yeah,
especially now that I'm a father myself.
absolutely. Absolutely. And your grandfather, Ken, had done a lot of work on this case. Also, kind of a lot of going after Dawn in different ways, according to what we learned about letters that were being left all over the place and some other
Yes.
things like that. Was there like a handoff between Ken and yourself? Did he like give you his case file essentially, or was there just talks, long talks between you two?
Yeah, no real handoff. It was just more so, Ken and my grandmother were just so active. I call her my nana, but she wants justice more than anything in this world. Understandably so. As I started to get more involved, I would reach out to Ken, and he would fill in a lot of the blanks from things that I didn't remember. Like I remembered some of the bigger things, but a lot of the things that to kind of fill in the blanks of mailing the letters or conversations that he had, I didn't know. I
Yeah.
wasn't in that loop, and so it it's been really cool because it's also helped forge a good relationship with us. It's been a really unique experience, and I've learned a lot of good life lessons just from some of those interactions with him.
I think it's also really special, just this thought that this pursuit for justice is being handed down. Like we hear about it in terms of detectives, where you have a detective that retires and then it gets handed off to someone else, and they kind of take a fresh look. It's not often you hear about that happening kind of generationally within a family. So it's just a
Yes,
really neat aspect, and I think it's just another way that it's a strong demonstration to everyone watching about how important Sherry and Kelsey are to this family, and how you guys are still feeling that pain. You still have that hole in your heart all these years later. Um, spe-
absolutely.
Speaking of which, on a lot of the footage you uploaded, there was a detective that was working on it named Cindy Lundberg. Did she retire?
She did.
Okay, so it got handed off at that point. Did it get? How many
Yes,
times has it been handed off?
man. I want to say 3, 4 times.
Yeah,
So it went from her, then another group of guys, um, and then they retired, and so I mean it's gone through a lot of hands, a lot of different um, theories and thoughts, and it's always been the frustrating part of the family is we don't have access to those things.
right.
And I feel like a lot of us, especially me, my pap, and it's we would do anything to just be able to look and to kind of put together our thoughts and theories with it. But it's gone through a lot of different hands, and you do start to lose hope. I remember my mother made a comment to me once that was, my nana didn't think that this would get solved during her lifetime
Wow.
because of the fact it was cold for so long. And I think that really is what propelled me to just kind of take that leap. It's the way my life has shifted out. Like when my aunt died, I was a very introverted child. I kept to myself, but was like a sponge. And I turned to doing music. That was my coping mechanism. I had wrote a song about the whole situation, and it's how I was able to cope with it myself. And as I grew into my professional career, I got into home security, and taking a proactive approach to protecting families against burglaries and fires and carbon monoxides and all these things. And I've always said that if I could go back in life, with what I've learned, running a sales organization, is I'm fascinated with the detective role in an investigation. And somewhere along the way, someone told me it's going to take a creative mind, to bring justice to this. And it's kind of a challenge, but I also felt, like that's what I can bring to this is that devil's advocate and, pushback. Because I will say this, John, that, the one thing that looking back at the family,
Mm-hmm.
everyone gets so set in their ways with a thought or an idea that it's hard to push off of that. Right. I mean, that's
Yeah.
26 years
Yeah.
of serious conviction. And so it does help a little bit bring in a different perspective, whether it's right or wrong, or it's a different perspective that just allows minds to open up a little bit. And I think that in itself allows for new hope and optimism moving forward.
Yeah, really well said. And I know in some families, you will have very different beliefs being held by each member to the point where sometimes they just won't even talk about it because they know that,
Yes.
oh, this person doesn't believe my point of view on that here. And I think even between you and Ken, it seems like maybe there's some different focus that's happening that I think we'll touch on as we go through this. But
Absolutely.
let's start with cleaning some of this stuff up from the last episode. Now, one of the questions I had on the previous episode was about Sherry's new boyfriend slash fiance, right? They were actually,
Yep.
okay. I thought his name might be Al and that he might have been a friend of her ex-husband, Don. Can you clear all that up for us? Who is this guy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So Al and Don met. They were doing like water purification systems, and so they were friends and or co-workers, if you will. And that's how I guess Sherry got introduced to Al.
Okay.
At some point along the way, there was an affair, and that relationship ended up blossoming, and Sherry and Don ended up getting their divorce and went through a big custody battle. And so that was there was a lot going on there. I've always had speculation because of that. Just like how tight was their relationship? The two of them. Like what do we know about that? Um, but it seems as if that's how they met. Through that wasn't like a lifelong buddy or anything. It was more of a new relationship that just kind of flourished into a bad chain of events.
Okay, gotcha. So, and I did see in one of the news segments, they did release his name. It's Al Bartlett. Is that right?
Al Barnett.
Barnett. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Something else I ran into during that last episode was someone that was claiming to be a stepdaughter of Dawn's said that Al had actually failed a polygraph. However, in one of those news segments that you uploaded recently, it said that he actually passed a polygraph. Do we know which one's correct?
Yes. We've always been told, by the info of that news broadcast that he did take the polygraph and he did pass it. There was always speculation, was he told that, but not really,
Right.
or and so that's one of those things where I've heard that information, from the newscast and from the family as well. I've always been under the impression that it was kind of, not wasn't like passing with flying colors, if you will,
Okay.
and so it's a little dicey, but he did take one and he did comply with what the police wanted them to do.
So, in a lot of those early newscasts, they kind of made it sound like he was cleared. Has he officially been cleared in this investigation?
For a long time, we had thought so, but from a conversation that I've had in the past 12 months, nobody's been cleared. Everyone is considered a suspect. And I like that, because I personally feel, that the local police department, that Fairfax County Police, I think they got a little one track minded and potentially missed a lot, during the initial part of this investigation. And you can almost kind of get a sense of that looking back at the old footage, because you see the same names listed, and some of the other ones that in any one of these types of cases, I would assume, the boyfriend would also be a very prime suspect.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, if we're looking at Al and Dawn in particular, both of them have the makeup of potentially being a strong person of interest in this case. In Don's case, if he is upset about the affair and he's upset with Al, what better way to hurt Al and maybe get some sense of relief for himself than having Sherry taken off the board and that child that they had together not being given life here.
That's right.
So I get the possibility, and obviously the media super, super focused in that direction. For the cases that we cover here on the channel, there's also the thought that Al might have not wanted to be a father. And
Right.
we see numerous cases where a pregnant woman, typically in third trimester, disappears or gets murdered. And some of those cases certainly do point back to the significant other being the culprit. So it is interesting to me that the focus was so strong on Dawn right from the get-go and really didn't waver. Like it's been focused on Dawn this whole time. When,
Yes.
like the experience I have of looking into these cases is kind of saying like, well, we should be looking at Al like probably just as strongly.
Yes, and that's, I'm so glad you say that. And as I started digging into this, in fact, one of those news postings that I put up there, they talk about the statistics of pregnant women.
Yeah,
I had no idea. I mean, it that is just absolutely heartbreaking. You would never assume that that would be such a leading cause of death.
it's
And
amazing.
when you look back at this, it's hearing your perspective right there of what Don had to gain. That's a that's a really good way of looking at it. The way that everyone's always discussed it was, Sherry was about, Don already had custody of the girls. He was getting child support, so he was kind of in the driver's seat from a custody standpoint. But Sherry, she's about to, be married, have another child, create, that home life, and, to be able to fight for the custody. And I think, when I came into this case, this is where I kind of ruffled a lot of feathers within the family, because I looked at that, I've been through the custody battle before, and that didn't make sense to me. It's like, you had an affair, there's a child out of wedlock, now approaching the courts and getting custody. That just seems far-fetched. It seems like Don, would tear that up. And then from Al's standpoint, I look back and, I started asking a lot of questions, because, Al had two kids of his own, and he had custody of those children. And, you look at that and it's like, especially back in the, late 90s, how did you end up with custody of those kids? What happened, with the wife? What
Very
do we
true.
know about that?
Yeah.
Like what was she, on something, or was she incarcerated, or, and to me, that's worth, I got to know that information. And now, you fast forward all these years, what it seems to look like is the woman that he was married to prior to being with Sherry, he's now back with.
Oh,
And so there's something about that, to me, that just screams red flag.
yeah.
And I think, that's what makes this case so interesting, is because, when you play that role, and I think, 99% of the family conversations that I've participated in, these are like the conversations, the theory, who had what to gain, and but you look at it from that perspective, and it's like, man, there's just so much there to rule someone out so early. If you don't have all that information,
Yeah.
why not?
Yeah. I'd
Right. And
love
I
to
think
know.
that's where it's like,
I'd love to know like where Al was that night. Like, did they check his alibi? Was that solid?
Well, that's the story, man. Like I get when you just said that, I got goosebumps all over my arm. It's bizarre. So, that night I was 15. So I had my driver's permit. I was home at the house with my mom. My dad was there. My dad had a poker game going on with some buddies from work. And my mom ran me up to the 7-Eleven, got me a Slurpee. We came back. And once we walk in the door, one of my dad's coworkers had pulled my mom aside and said, "We just got a phone call about your sister." It, which was bizarre, right? Like, we get this phone call, and this was from Al's son saying that Sherry's been shot. And we're like, obviously, the emotion going on in that time frame. My mom is just a basket case, but we hop in the car, me and my mother, and we're heading to the hospital, right? Like she wants to get up there ASAP. As we're pulling out of the neighborhood, a car's pulling in, and it's Al. And to put perspective at this, Al lived in a town called Stafford, which is about 30 minutes or so south of Springfield, where the murder took place. We were living in Woodbridge, which is right between Stafford and Springfield, and about 15 minutes from where the murder took place. And so Al comes driving down our street. He hops into the car with mom. I get into the back seat, and I'm like hovering over, the seat because it's just so eerie. It's like it's bizarre.
Yeah.
And he's so emotional, and he says, "I heard on the radio that Sherry was shot." And we're like, well, why did you come here? Right? Like, and he said, "I didn't know where the hospital was." Now, mind you, the hospital is up further north from Springfield. It's nowhere near where my house is, by any means. And that was always something that stuck in my head as a kid. How did you hear this on the radio? Right? Like, would they release a name on the radio?
Not typically.
Not that quick, right?
No.
And I remember my mom, John, asking this question, like, "Well, how do you know?" And that it was Sherry. And he had said, "Well, because they said she was pregnant. It has to be her." Well, the son, when he had called, had made a comment saying that Sherry's dead, right? And so it's that whole string of events. And one of my questions that I have on my board, and that I reach out to family with, is if we really think back to that time frame, what was the chain of events?
Yeah.
When did everyone get a phone call, and from whom? Because that has never sat right with me. That again, as a father, I think looking back now as a father and a husband, if I got a call like that, I'm straight to the hospital. If I had an assumption like that, I'm like, you could not. I'd be 100 miles an hour at that hospital, not going. We live 15 minutes off the highway.
Right.
And
Right.
so you're coming 15 minutes off the highway to our house. You don't even know we're home.
And his daughter is about to be born and survive for another 2 days.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, man. It's so creepy to me to this day. I get goosebumps thinking about it because none of that makes sense.
I don't recall seeing an image. Has an image ever been released of Al through the media?
I don't think so.
Okay. Does he happen to look like either of the composites?
I'd have to see it side by side. I do have some. I went digging, and I asked my mother to pull some photos
Yeah.
from when Sherry was pregnant, and I do have some photos of Al.
Okay.
It I don't know. I feel like you can make a case for different things, but I don't know.
Okay. Um, yeah. It's a lot of interesting conversation around this. I think we could probably stay on this topic for another 30 minutes, but we got a lot to cover here. Just a quick item to clean up. Fullerton Court is where the vehicle was parked. So I wasn't
Yep.
sure about that if it was Fullerton Road or Fullerton Court. It was Court. So the shooter did run through the buildings effectively, or around the buildings, to get over to where the getaway driver was, who
That's right.
is this sketch on the left. Who's the sketch on the right?
Sketch on the right was one that came a little bit after, and it was a witness that popped up that had saw Don at a Bennigan's restaurant.
Right.
And so this is the image of who he was accompanied by at the restaurant.
Okay. Okay. And do you have any more details about that? I know it's the Bennigans in Landmark Mall, Alexandria. But do we know like who this witness is? Did they know Don? Because it was an interesting detail they had in terms of like, why is Don over here? Because this isn't where he would normally be.
I believe it was a family friend.
Okay.
They did know Don, and I think that's how it kind of stuck, because that's always been a question of mine too. Is, like, it's just, how do you pick someone up in a restaurant like that without knowing them? But
Mm-hmm.
it was a family friend.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting. Has anything come out of this lead? Has this person ever been identified or found or?
Not to our knowledge.
Okay.
And again, they've been, the police have been so tight-lipped with everything
Yeah.
that, it's just been but nothing that's ever been released publicly.
Is it, I mean, are we thinking that potentially he's the shooter?
I think that's what the theory is.
Okay.
Like perhaps that could have been a conversation, to kind of strategize, or, potentially, make an arrangement. But I think that's what's always been the theory there.
Okay. Now, you sent me an interesting comparison. We're not sure if Al looks like either of these people, but you did send me a different comparison, and I was kind of blown away by the person you sent. He hasn't been publicly named, so I've blurred the actual picture a bit, but I still wanted to give the viewers a sense of why this is such a compelling match. We've got pretty close, the part's on the wrong side, but we've got pretty similar hairstyle, similar facial shape. I can tell you, if you could see the unblurred version, you would probably be recognizing other things that are strong similarities. Who is this?
This is another friend of the, the whole group of Sherry and Don.
Okay.
Um,
We're gonna call him.
and
We're gonna call him Gary, just to make
Yep,
sure it's clean. Where he hasn't been named, no formal interest, no press articles, nothing like that. So we'll refer to him as Gary for the purposes here. So who Gary's just a part of this circle of friends, essentially.
that's right. Yeah, he's a part of the circle of friends. He was the husband of a very good friend of my aunt. Always kind of known as a womanizer, if you will.
Okay.
They've been referenced as the, Barbie and Ken couple. Good looking, professional. That there were some stories that have came out years later, that there were different interactions that have taken place at a get together between the couples, where, arguments have gone out, and there's speculation, from his wife, that potentially, he could have had a potential fling at some point, with Sherry. And
Hmm.
so a lot of real strong thoughts there,
Okay.
that kind of put him into play. And people that knew his personality, he did carry a 9mm on him. He worked with the IRS, as a group of guys like that, where he'd go, do different collections, things like that.
Okay.
He always had the collared shirt on. That was a very interesting part of that composite, that that his ex had really thought of, is he always wore, those white button ups.
Yeah.
Nothing's been confirmed. What made me super interested in him, to be blunt,
Yeah.
is I started to look up his name, like his criminal history. Does he have anything? Right. And there was a ton of drug abuse and a ton of domestic issues.
Mm.
Like, I'm talking about, assaults, and things of that nature. And when I say a ton, I mean, it is a rap sheet. If there was a fling going on, because if we back up a bit, Al, he was an abusive guy as well. There was a story that I remember hearing that is just the most disgusting story ever of he had locked my aunt out of the home completely naked.
Mm.
And she had to, go to the neighbor's house and just humiliated. And so things like that.
Yeah.
And I've always said as a man, I've always just wanted to have that conversation. What in the world would cause you to have an act like that, right? And so I think that's what had those creative juices going of, well, if it was something like that, a fling, well, that would be a major motive, right? Because the baby, he was married at the time, like we're talking about disrupting things of that nature.
Yeah.
And so when his, wife came and had concerns, man, it did. It started triggering every receptor in my brain. Like, no one knows the spouse better than the spouse, right?
So Gary's ex approached you at some point, kind of with this theory that
Yes,
maybe he was involved.
that's right.
I'll tell you what's really interesting about him to me is this thought of it being a conspiracy of some kind. Like there's been so much focus. Let's kind of put Don back in play for a second. So Don decides he wants to do this. He finds a trigger man.
Boom.
And then decides, well, I also need a driver. I need someone else in on this. Why?
Right.
It's really interesting to me to think about this Gary aspect because he could have been the one that was benefiting. He drives the trigger man there. Now you've got this conspiracy down from 3, which, look, keeping 3 mouths shut through something like this, very, very difficult. Get it down to 2, and then your chances of it coming out in some sideways conversation are way less. Your chances of being able to get one to flip on the other, way less. There's a case, the Jared Bridegan case, which is one that we've been analyzing over the past year here. And it is a large conspiracy. It's essentially an ex-wife, her new husband, and then they find a trigger man. But even in that situation, it's still the same thing where it's 2 of them are kind of the main conspirators, but they find the one trigger man that goes and does the deed. It's really interesting to me to think of a situation where it could have been Gary. He could have been waiting in the truck. He's part of it because he wanted to make sure that it got pulled off right and that he got his trigger man out of there and that guy was safe so that he pays him his money. I don't ever want to see you again. That's that.
That's right. John, one of the most compelling pieces of information that I heard from the ex that really had me going is Gary was approached by law enforcement a couple years later. They did do a sit down because, it was a friend, of my aunt.
Yeah.
And during that sit down, it was Gary and his ex. And Gary always told his ex that Sherry was killed with a sawed-off shotgun, which is just, the statement that sticks out to her very heavy. And she remembers at the questioning or during the discussion they had of learning that it was a 9mm. And every hair on her body stood up because she knew that's the weapon that he carried on him.
Right.
And so that added a lot of suspicion. She actually walked away from this conversation, gained her composure, and she was under the impression since Gary he wasn't law enforcement per se, but he was in that, arena, that it was kind of, you got my back, I got your back type thing, the brotherhood. And so he was never really looked at
Right.
as a suspect, because of those ranks. And so, again, it's a hearsay type of thing. And I think sometimes, why I like conversing with my pap is he'll bring some logic back into the mix because my mind will run. Perhaps there is a perpetrator that isn't that hasn't been identified, and maybe this is a big piece of information. I know the ex did speak with law enforcement, So,
Yeah.
um, it is a documented thing.
Yeah, it's weird because the Gary conversation it's kind of a mystery box. Like we don't know what that relationship was. We're not even sure if something did actually happen, but we've got his ex saying, yeah, something like that happened. And that just leaves this big question mark about, like in terms of motivation for Dawn, pretty easy to understand. Motivation for Al, pretty easy to understand. Motivation for Gary, unknown, because we don't
Right.
understand that relationship well enough.
That's
Um,
right. There was a fallout with my aunt and the ex of Gary. They had broken off for a good period of time. When uh, Sherry got pregnant, she had reached out to the ex saying, "Hey, we've been friends for a long time. I want to come clean, about whatever it was." And the ex had told her, "I don't want to know. I don't want to know. It's come clean." But my aunt did ask her. They had a child together that had a name of Kelsey, um, or Morgan,
okay.
and
Okay.
would she mind if she used that name for her baby's name? And so that's always also been a wild piece. It's just, again, it's
Yeah.
friends. There's probably nothing to it, but you
Oh,
know,
that's yeah. I mean,
uh,
now we're actually introducing the question of is Kelsey even Al's?
that I got confirmation on, because I did bring this up, John. To one of the detective years ago of what if
Yeah.
speculate, and I hate doing this, and because people that don't know the situation or my aunt, I don't want to paint this bad picture of what if, and she's living this life that's just
I get it. I get
this
it.
unrighteous life, because she wasn't. She had some really traumatic situations, with the relationships, and whether they were decisions she made to get herself into that or not. Nobody deserves to go through some of those things, like being locked out of your home naked, and
Yeah.
a multitude of other
Well,
things.
and to be
But
fair, even her mother described her as the one that kind of roamed away from the flock and then,
at,
got back into the family later in a significant
yeah,
way. So, yeah.
and I think subconsciously, man, that's why I'm so attached to this, because in a big sense, that was me with the family.
Yeah.
Like, I've been kind of that guy that strayed away. I told you I got into music and went down that path, and so and I can relate. Is it possible that that she's dealing with this traumatic situation with Al, and she's also going through a custody battle with Don? That that one day she decided to have dinner with a family friend, or that family friend was pursuing her, like, and I think for me it's like, all of that is on the table,
Yeah.
and so when I asked the detective of, do we know if this was Al's baby, they confirmed it is Al's baby, and it was kind of like a shut door. But where I push back is, that doesn't do it for me, because if the motive was the baby, and if there was a fling at some point,
Right.
and he even had the thought that
Right.
that could have been his kid,
Yep.
that's the best motive I've heard so far,
Yeah.
because he was married and it would have implicated a lot of lives.
Well, and we're talking about someone that is somewhat interested in finances. He's working with the IRS in some way. For him to think of the possibility of, oh, I'm going to be on the hook for 18 years of child support.
Yes. And losing a big inheritance. Apparently, the ex was due a big inheritance. He did not want to end up losing that. Eventually, they ended up parting ways anyway.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
all of that, I think we're thinking the same thing there. And so it's like, so that's where Gary comes into this mix here. There's
Yeah.
a lot of unknowns, which is unfortunate. Here's another piece that's unfortunate about the whole thing. Um, you start getting into these, 26 years later, and you start looking in through the comments. I wonder if people are still alive, or could they have passed? And you know, Gary ended up passing a few months back,
Oh, wow. Wow.
and so it's like, will we ever have that? And that just, that's the frustration.
It's unfortunate that we can't take Don out of the equation. It's almost unfortunate that he was. I mean, the detective, that the original detective working on this case, Cindy Lumberg, was very clear about like, hey, this guy's not being cooperative, and we can't get him in for a lie detector. And even with the communication that I saw between Ken and Don that was happening online and stuff, like now hearing all these other possibilities, he might be telling the truth. Don might be trying to be straight with Ken and just saying, hey, look, I don't know. I just don't know what happened. It'd be great if the investigative steps could happen to really remove him from the board so the focus could be put in the right place. Has it ever changed? Has he ever been willing to speak to law enforcement? I know he's one of these guys that wants to have his lawyer there, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to go and have a sit down. You can have your lawyer sitting right next to you while you're questioned.
That's right. Yeah, I don't think so. I think, from the whole time it's kind of been arm's length away. Um, I have looked at it the same way, from that perspective. Like, if it were me and my kids and, the letters or the posters and, would I want to shield them from that, especially, if I'm innocent? Absolutely, I would, like
Yeah.
that's, and so some of that stuff, and this is where this is the touchy conversation with family. I'm not just going for the layup, man. I want to see I want to know what I don't know
Yeah.
before I come to any conclusions of, who's cleared and not cleared. I did find it ironic, however, when they did the search warrant at Don's home in Ohio.
Uh-huh.
I read a statement in one of the newspaper articles where his attorney said, I wrote you a letter recently. We were going to come and,
Oh,
try to do
yeah.
a sit down with you,
Right.
you know? And so when you see stuff like that, that's where it's like, now it's like you're trying to get cute with the words.
Yeah.
And then, it's like that suspicion comes back up.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm thankful once again for the work that you did putting up these old news segments, because you did put up the America's Most Wanted, and in
Yes.
that they put the question to Dawn. So let's watch a clip of that together here real quick.
Did you kill Sherry?
I had absolutely nothing to do with Sherry's death. None whatsoever.
It's so strange to me for him to even participate at this level with all this protection that he kind of put up around himself. But all of a sudden, John Walsh comes knocking and, okay, I'm going to do that interview. Like, sit down with law enforcement, man. Let us clear you.
Yes. Yes. No, me too. My mom has a story about that, by the way. When that whole filming took place, they were at a conference in DC. It was, Ken, my grandmother, my mom, and that particular piece, a lot of the detectives in the room and, that saw it, immediately got bad vibes over the little hesitation there in the eyes. And, that's all out of my league, but
Yeah.
she always references back to that as a time that, and I haven't seen that video in 15 years, man. And so as I'm really digging into this, and really I credit you, because you had made a statement in the last podcast that said, this is one of those cases where information's disappearing.
Yeah.
Like the images on these articles aren't even popping up. And in my mind, it's like, how long is it going to be before it's just gone? And now our chances are none, like, and from a different perspective, the perpetrators involved in this, you got to think, that they feel they're in the clear. I mean, it's not getting a lot of attention. Stuff is fading away and dying. A lot of these people aren't even mentioned. I mean, we did do so many. My Nana and Ken were so active every year with visuals and different things. And so now that this has been going, like my sister reached out to me, she has some tapes. And so I'm excited to just kind of put the library together, have this thing live on. And it's been good for me too, because like that scene right there, that's powerful. And you hit it on the head. You're not sitting down with the detectives. You're willing to let the local detective put that kind of smut on your name of
Right.
you're not cooperating. And so you have a guilty persona in your own backyard,
Right.
but now there's a nationwide syndicated show, and boom, I want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
It is a little, when you look into the like a sociopath or people like that it gets a little creepy,
It
looking
is
back
part of
and
the
seeing that.
problem here. Yeah, you do get that feeling of like, this guy's trying to control the situations very strongly. And what's the reason for that? Particularly when, he's got 2 daughters from this woman. And, he's going to have to answer to them at some level, at some point, for whatever their feelings are on this case as well. For him, in later years, to be able to look them in the eyes and say, Heather, Lauren, I did everything I could to try to help your mother's case come to justice. Like, can he really do that? He can't do that with what we're seeing.
That's such a powerful statement, and that's something that I, especially now, having daughters of my own.
Yeah.
Man, and I would go to the end of the earth and back. I put the heart and soul on the table. You would have no doubt that I wasn't a part of this.
Yeah. Do you talk to Heather and Lauren about this stuff? How are they doing with all this?
Heather and Lauren got reacclimated with the family a few years back. I think back like 2011-ish.
Yeah.
I haven't talked to them much, and the things, I have spoke with just out of the respect for those girls and everything that they've endured and are going through. It's, we don't speak much about it, but I am just so damn proud of them.
It's hard to justify his actions around this. It really is. It's really, really tricky. But I appreciate that you're at least staying open to the other possibilities here, because I think some of these other possibilities we've talked about today are really compelling, and I feel proud that I'm part of your team here, putting a stake in the ground of we're not letting this information disappear. Here's some other considerations about this case that people need to know about. And
yes,
this is all just another extension of Ken's work. And we're talking about a man that is 83 years old now. Is that right?
Yeah.
I mean,
that's right.
This guy's been putting his life towards this. I actually sent him a message. I told him we were recording this today. I asked if there was any statement he wanted to make. He sent a reply to that. He said, "You are interviewing a great guy, our grandson, Mike. We, Jane and I, are in our 80s and feel gratified that our quest for justice for Sherry is being taken up by younger generations of our family. My feelings are well known. I was responsible for Ann Culp meeting Sherry at a softball game, for hiring and finding work for him, and watching him woo and marry Sherry. I saw 2 beautiful girls born to them prior to their marriage souring and ending. I think Don and his girlfriend, Toni Story, are somehow responsible for the shooting of Sherry, who was pregnant. I think Don and Toni were in a very ugly custody battle for the 2 girls, and I think Sherry was winning. Maybe others will disagree, but we hope your efforts will stimulate justice. We love you for doing this, Ken Young." He's raising some interesting points. Have you looked into the custody situation at all, into how that battle was going?
Not a ton. This is where, I've always kind of pushed back, and recently I've kind of been swayed a little more onto this because, and I think it's more so just how different people have articulated it to me from the custody battle standpoint of, she was going to go win custody and just, going through that in these counties in Virginia where it's very old fashioned. Mm-hmm. It's like, no way. But Sherry was a very loving woman. I mean, I looked at her as like a second mother. We were always together. but those girls loved being with their mother. They loved it, and she loved them. I mean, she was the light of her eye. And that one picture that always pops up of those two little girls that, and
Yeah.
they're all dressed, man, it's like it's so sad. And so from that standpoint, yeah, I can see where Ken's going with that and the thought that he had with that. And I think another very interesting dynamic here that doesn't get nearly enough light is Don's wife, Toni.
I was just going to aim that way. Yeah, Ken put a lot of focus on it, but I know that there was also a grand jury that convened, and she was questioned in that.
Yes. So, Toni had an evil presence to her. I think Toni had this envision of a life, that she wanted to have. And when I mean an evil presence to her, it's like, think about the situation here. You got my grandmother just had her daughter and granddaughter murdered.
Right.
And these two girls are all she has left of from my aunt. And she loved those girls. I mean, all of us as kids, there is no better place to be than Nana's house. I mean, those are the fondest memories of my entire life. And so you have this woman who, they're literally trying to sue them for grandparents' rights because, they're just constantly being denied visitation, which is just bizarre.
Right.
And Toni at one point had my Nana served on stand, pointed her out and said that she had verbally called her a bitch on the phone and arrested. And so you have and didn't show up, right? So she got obviously she got nolly crossed out and nothing came of that, but she never showed up. It's just that spiteful behavior that had that evil feel to her. And
there was also
when,
the story about the letter and the pictures that were mailed,
yes,
and then they were returned tore up. And did I see that they actually found Toni's fingerprints on the envelope? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, that was absolutely Toni. And she wasn't nice to those girls. I know that. She was not nice to those girls. She was damn near abusive. She did at their own soccer games, wouldn't let them go sit with their mom. Weird things like that. And so, there was an FBI profiler, someone that got brought into the case.
Yeah. She
was very, very highly written about inside of what that profiler was looking at. Like she could have been the puppet master, behind the scenes, really orchestrating a lot.
Well, it's interesting. I know I've already mentioned the Jared Bridegan case, but essentially that's kind of what we have happen in that situation, where an ex-wife is controlling kind of the new husband, and it looks like they go and they hire a hitman to kill the former husband. What's interesting to me is looking at the pieces of this case originally a year ago. My hope was that at some point Don and Toni would divorce, and then Toni could kind of be flipped into like, hey, share the information that we can't get from Don. But in the situation, and I think this might be why it's being looked at this way by your grandfather as well. If she's part of the problem, of course she's not going to flip, and it doesn't matter if they're divorced or together. She's got personal interests to take care of because maybe she's much more of a component to this than we all thought originally.
That's right. There was a lot of excitement when we had found that they did get divorced.
Yeah.
For that reason, like, what happened, what had gone wrong here. And the grand jury, she did get indicted to come to the grand jury and give that testimony. I would do anything to get my hands on that. You know, I never had a lot of any really interaction with Toni. You know, again, she was really no relevance to me. The fascinating thing to me is this: it's like you have these girls, like, you know, we always look at this like my grandmother and Ken and me and my mom, and we see those depths of emotions and how traumatic it is, and it's terrible. But then when you step back and you think you have two little girls that just lost their mother, and they're being introduced to this other woman now, you know, who's fairly new in their life over the last few years. That's their new constant, and the family that they were always surrounded with, always. I mean, I literally feel that my siblings and Lauren and Heather were together probably 20 weekends out of the year. I mean, that's how close my aunt and my mother were.
Yeah.
Now you remove them from all of that, dude. That's the part for me that's just like that just feels so dark. And this is where I struggle, but this is where our conversation right here is really helping me, because earlier I had alluded to, you know, I could put myself in Don's shoes a little bit, and you know, if I saw posters at my place of employment and neighbors, and I felt like, you know, I was being harassed unfairly, you know, then yeah, you know, I don't know if I would want my children, you know, in your presence,
right?
Because I don't know what you're going to feed them. But as a father now, this is family, man. Like, this isn't like a stranger that you have a disagreement with. This isn't like you know, we had an argument and we're parting ways. This is a very traumatic, you know, some life altering event for a lot of respects for everyone. I mean, I look back at the family dynamic as a whole, and I feel like this situation that hit our family hurt our family. It fractured our family.
It's like a tornado.
It really
it's like
did.
a tornado being dropped on your house. No, I know. It's never the same. It's never the same after.
And so it's like, dude, from that standpoint, it's like, why not just go out of your way to show some emotion, to show that, you know, it isn't me. And even more so, do you think Ken would have been pushing that hard?
Right.
If he would have had access to the grandkids? It's like you basically have just completely ghosted us, moved to a different state. You're sending back ripped up materials. You're not even allowing them to speak on the phone to their grandkids. You're instilling hatred in their heart to people that they love at a multiple, very impressionable age.
Yeah.
You're doing these things, and yet on the flip end, you're upset that there's a grandparent that's out there that is going to the end of the earth and back to be with their grandchild, the only thing they have left to resemble their mother.
Yeah.
Dude, that's where I just it creates almost like an anger, because
yeah. But you know, there's enough anger in that situation, and like I said, those decisions that he made and those positions that he took, his daughters are now grown up, they're adults, they're having families of themselves. To your point about perspective, they're getting new perspectives in their relationships, and they're going to be able to apply that looking back and wonder, why didn't dad help out on that? Like, why? Yeah, it would have been uncomfortable for him to be there a couple days, or he would have had to shell out some cash for his lawyer to be sitting next to him for a couple days, but then he would have been through it. That's part of the thing where it's tough, because it's like, it's a stopping block for the investigation. It's a stopping block for this family. And he doesn't seem to do anything to help move that until, you know, the girls go ahead and establish their own contact back with their grandparents the way they want it to be later in life. I know we kind of rolled off her a little bit, but I just want to know what happened to Toni.
So Toni ended up, they got a divorce. She ended up getting remarried in somewhere in Ohio. Here's some crazy irony here. I got a big kick out of this. She's married to a retired detective. And it's like a multiple generation, that this guy's father was an officer,
Yeah.
and she's now doing like police dispatch work. And her whole social media is post about the love of the men in blue and law enforcement.
Oh,
And
goodness.
it's very eerie and bizarre to me.
Mm.
She did do the grand jury, and again, like, we've never been able to see that. There's no way for us to know, the fabrications that are done. But
Yeah.
one very interesting piece that I've learned about this is it's come to my attention that when she got subpoenaed for the grand jury, she reached out to Don to cover the attorney fees.
Wow.
And
this is after
Don
their
covered
separation?
after the separation. And so that's a very loaded.
Yeah. That's a weird situation. Did they subpoena him?
I don't believe so.
So they were focused on her specifically. That is so weird. Yeah. And then she asked for attorney fees from him. Wow.
Yeah.
So we know a year ago, the FBI kind of does their new push. Are you the main contact for law enforcement at this point?
We still have it where my Nana,
Okay.
I always, any updates or anything, I've always said she deserves to hear anything first.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, she's been doing a lot of work on this case right from the start. And even outside of that, also in her advocacy for gun control, like trying to take on kind of the bigger elements of this case that contributed to it. Yeah, so a big shout out to Jane for that, for all of her wonderful work. So has there been any developments since this push by the FBI? Have you heard of anything that's kind of moving in the background, or maybe some new focus?
I will say this, that the FBI has been absolutely phenomenal in their approach. And it's been an amazing breath of fresh air compared to these last few years with the local police department's, cold case unit of, a couple cops, working all these cases.
Yeah.
They have been phenomenal. They don't update us with information, which is always, the frustrating part. My Nana made a comment to me the night before last, prior to the 26th anniversary, and she said, I wonder if we'll see something, announced tomorrow. And so, you always got that hope.
Yeah.
That's there. But I will say they have been absolutely phenomenal, and it has given a tremendous amount of hope and optimism for the family.
I'm glad to hear that. You guys, I know it's hard to keep it up after this many years, but it's good to know that you've got good people on your side working on this case. Of course, my hat's off to them. We know the logistics of this case. This is a tough case to take on. There's probably some social component that's going to help ultimately solve it at some point, or possibly some analysis from those shell casings. We did hear about the shell casings. If those same ejection marks might show up in some other crime at some point, maybe that's going to be the piece. But for me, I don't know. It really sounds like a social component is going to be the big thing to bring justice here. And of course, that's part of why we're talking about this here today. If you have any information on this case, please pick up the phone, call the FBI's toll-free tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. It's that simple. It's 1-800-225-5324. You can also call the Fairfax County Police Department at 703-246-7800. Or if you want to submit anonymously online, go to tips.fbi.gov. Get that tip in. And remember, there's a $10,000 reward that's been offered from the FBI as of last year. That's still active, but there's also a $50,000 reward from the family. So they're looking for that information that's going to bring justice in this case. Michael, anything you want to say before we cut out here?
Well, first and foremost, thank you. Like seeing the initial story that you did was awesome. I thought you did an amazing job, and for giving me the opportunity to come on here. I mean, I'm just extremely excited to have you on our team. For many years, it's felt like things were dying, and even this relationship here, it creates hope. The FBI getting involved after so many years, it's like we have the best of the best on this case. And I always get nervous, personally looking at this case. Given what you just said, there's not a ton of evidence, there's a lot of circumstantial. Will they get a prosecution? Will this come down to ultimately needing someone to cop a plea, or immunity, or things of that nature? But at the end of the day, worst case scenario, even if this happened to be solved by a case of immunity, somebody getting it and telling the story as the witness, and to bring justice to this, man, to allow the family to grieve, but even more importantly, to allow Lauren and Heather to have an answer, to have closure, so they can go about their life. At the end of the day, for me, it's my commitment is to my mom, to my nana, and to my cousins, and ultimately my aunt, that we're not going to let this thing die. And if we can have any closure at all, I just hope and pray, that somebody develops a conscience over time and very soon, and takes a proactive approach of working with who's on top of this case. I've watched a lot of these things, man, and the one thing I've learned is the FBI is the best in the world at what they do.
Yeah.
Everything I've ever read, everything I've ever looked at, man, you always get a little more in your favor by cooperating, by talking, and just coming forward. Bring closure to it. Everyone move on. My grandmother is getting older.
Yeah.
I really, more than anything in this world, I just want to see her have closure.
Yep. Yep. I hear that. And please, next time you see them, send my best to both Ken and Jane. And if you ever get a chance to put the word in or get a hug in for Heather and Lauren, please let them know that there's people out here that do care about their mother, care about their sister, and want to see justice for this. And we know this is a tough thing within the family. We know this can be really hurtful to hear these things discussed like this. I hope that they appreciate the tone and the way that we've gone about today's conversation. And Michael, I can't thank you enough for being so open and sharing all this with us. Thank you so much for making me a part of this.
John.
And I am part of your team. If there's anything I can do in the future, you just reach out and I'm there for you guys. So
thank you so much, man.
You got it. Sit tight. I'll be right back with you. Brain scratchers, that is information that I don't know how many other people know, but now you're part of this team as well. Please help us raise exposure to this case. Please share this video in Virginia and the surrounding areas. We know that some of these persons of interest have moved to other states. We need the exposure raised across the board. So please share this video with your friends and family. Let them know about Michael, about Michael's mission, about this family seeking justice after 26 years. Also, a very big thank you to our wonderful supporters here who allow us to bring you content like this with limited commercials. A big thank you to PayPal supporters Jennifer Wilson, Roxanne Brown, Amanda Beard, and also we have a coffee supporter, Agla Sanchez. If you want to support the channel, just visit LordanArts.com. You can find all of those options there. Have a wonderful weekend. Maybe squeeze your families a little tighter this weekend in honor of Sherry and Kelsey. And I'll see you guys here again next week on the LordanArts channel.